There is no denying that Tim Burton has a style. Some call it Burtonesque, attributing the characteristic dark and jagged imagery, macabre story and loner protagonists to Gothic and Expressionist influences. Yet a little discussed comparison is between Sleepy Hollow and the German Expressionist movement. First, let's start with some context. German Expressionism was an artistic movement originating in Germany, first appearing in poetry and visual art in the early 20th century. Following World War I, the movement made the leap to cinema, with films such as The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Nosferatu, and most famously, Metropolis. Expressionism grew from the then new field of psychotherapy. Its films dealing with human angst and internal turmoil, expressed through distorted settings featuring jagged-edge tilting architecture, high contrast of both light and colour, exaggerated performances, and a pervading sense of horror and the supernatural. This brings us back to Tim Burton's 1999 film, Sleepy Hollow. The first link between Sleepy Hollow and the German Expressionist movement can be summed up in this quote from Ian Roberts, describing German Expressionist cinema as having a preoccupation with notions of dream and reality, madness and sanity, and blindness and vision. This quote could also describe the plight of the film's protagonist, New York Constable Ichabod Crane, who was sent to the small town of Sleepy Hollow to investigate a series of beheadings. Crane, a man of science, is determined the deaths can be explained logically with a mortal perpetrator, while the townspeople whisper about a legendary headless horseman. There is also an obvious connection between the expressionist aesthetic and the visual style of Sleepy Hollow. Sleepy Hollow, like all of Tim Burton's films, uses a high degree of stylisation, chiaroscuro lighting and emphasis on metaphor and symbol, all culminating in his signature distortion of reality. The film is most well known for its use of colour. Initially, Burton and Lubezki considered shooting the film in black and white, but ended up desaturating the colour footage in order to create the bleak yet magical nature of the film. Like the German Expressionist aesthetic, the set design of Sleepy Hollow is heavily influenced by the Gothic, using dull colours and dramatic shadows to create high contrast visuals and a sense of otherworldliness. The film's production designer himself acknowledges the expressionist influences on the film's set design, saying some of the designs are reminiscent of the old German expressionist films, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu, which have a very strong graphic two-dimensional look within a three-dimensional environment. The focus on the visuals of the film aligns with the semantic approach of German Expressionism, focusing on the mise-en-scène and cinematography of the film rather than the structures and the themes. That's not to say that no attention is paid to the direction of the film and its themes. Instead of being a simple revamp of a classic American tale, Burton uses the clichés and traditional tropes and flips them on their heads to explore themes of power, gender, and spirituality. These themes align with the film's struggle between legend and logic. Despite Ichabod's firm belief in science, he readily accepts the existence of magic. The women central to the story, Katrina Van Tassel, Mrs. Van Tassel and her sister, and Ichabod's own mother, all practice witchcraft, whether for good or for evil. Katrina's story in particular somewhat mirrors that of Metropolis's Maria, who begins as an innocent, saintly figure only for her character to become demonised and blamed for the acts committed by another. The film regularly subverts gender roles, giving women power and making men appear bickering and fearful. Ichabod himself embodies both the stereotypically feminine emotional side and the traditionally masculine rational one. Even Tim Burton once described Ichabod as a 13-year-old girl. This characterisation is developed through Tim Burton's iconic style of melodramatic acting in his films. Ichabod's stereotypical femininity is displayed through him fainting at the sight of blood, lusting over his love interest, and other general contortions of the face. The melodramatic acting style doesn't stop there. Christopher Walken's Headless Horseman is consistently over the top, building the myth of the killer. This acting style can easily be linked back to German Expressionism, where performances had to be dramatic to express emotion and tell the story without sound. A final connection between Tim Burton's style with Sleepy Hollow and German Expressionism can be made in terms of editing. While Burton admits to not paying much attention to the editing process, this also applies to Expressionist films. Most of the editing was kept very simple, using techniques such as cross-cutting and shot-reverse shot. Both styles also maintain a slow pace, paying attention to the story and the shots while allowing the editing to remain unseen. There are countless other similarities between Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow and German Expressionism, both visually and thematically. It's clear that today, over a decade later, German Expressionism remains an influence on cinema. The movement communicates a timeless issue of human angst and inner turmoil, while still allowing for exploration into current issues of power, gender, and spirituality. In the same way, Sleepy Hollow retells a classic narrative, with the same essential plot points and characters, while experimenting with cinematography, direction, and editing to revamp the familiar story for a contemporary audience.